Go ahead. Send me home. I'm like the man.
Good morning, everybody. We're talking baby talk this morning and adoption and stuff. So, yeah. Good morning, everybody. We hear that some of our Sunday school members are sick, and Miss Angie, we remember her in our prayers that she feels better. So we surely do miss having her in here with us. And hope some people are watching on Facebook. I didn't know if I kept thinking that I was gonna see the Clarks here every morning. We didn't send them a book because they were gonna come, and every Sunday morning I think I'll see their little faces in here. But let us know if you all are watching and you need a book and not gonna get to come soon, because we appreciate you watching, and hopefully Tommy and my daughter and Willie and Patsy and Cecil are watching this morning. But our lesson this morning, we're still talking about Elijah. It's on page 20 of our book, and it's called Saved from Famine. We know for the last few weeks, we've looked at Elijah's life. We've looked at the things that have happened during this time. We know that there has been some war going on between Syria, as I guess their Syrians are filling their oats, and they're kind of wanting to march across the country and take whatever they can get their hands on. It seems like that, sometimes I think and I wonder if women were in charge of things, that, people on countries that it's like, why can't they coexist and they take what they have and, and better themselves? But it seems like all the way back in history that people want more and more and more. But I guess if we break it down on a smaller level, we as people are kind of like that. It's just, if we got something, we're not satisfied, and we just want to take more and more instead of being satisfied with what we have. And we see during this period that, that they weren't satisfied at all with what they had. And we remember last week, it was called Elijah's Heavenly Defenders. We remember that there was a great Syrian army that had surrounded part of Israel, and that God's army showed up. That they had the servant of Elijah. Remember, he was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? He couldn't imagine how they would get out of it. And Elijah prayed that his eyes would be open so he could see. And once his eyes were open, he saw that the Lord's army had surrounded the Syrian army, and that he didn't have anything to fear. But he forgot that. And sometimes, as I'm reading these stuff, and I think of times in my life when you get really in a serious sorrow, or something's happening in your life that you can't control at all. Sometimes you get so hurt and so involved in it that you forget things that you can't do are very easy for God to do. But you have to allow Him to do it. You have to be still and let Him take charge of it. Because there's things that if we'll look at it rationally during the time and realize we can't do anything to change it. And that's what's happening here is, when you get in there, there is nothing they can do to change this situation on their own, nothing. That they've tried, but we'll see from this, they've tried a long, long time to do it, but they come to the point that they're back against the wall and they can't do anything. And we get that way. But we just kind of trust that the Lord will do it. He'll do what is right, not necessarily what we want. And that too is kind of a stumbling block from us, that we have it all worked out and what needs to be done. But more than likely, if we had it all worked out, we wouldn't be in that situation. A lot of times, some things are beyond our control. That, loss and stuff in our life, we don't have control. But we know that we have Him to hold on to in His promises. The golden text this week comes from Luke 18. It says, the things which are impossible with men are possible with God. So we know the lesson aim says God's power is unlimited. He can do the impossible. So there's nothing that we can't put outside his realm if it's the correct thing to do. So our lesson this morning is coming from 2 Kings. We're going to be in chapter 7, and it's verses 1 through 9 and 16 and 17. So we're going to skip just a little bit as we do it. And I'll go ahead and read through this, and then we'll start on the verses. It says, Then Elisha said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Then a Lord on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, Behold, and this is Elijah saying to the Lord, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shalt not eat thereof. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said one to another, Why sit we here until we die? If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit still here, we die also. Now therefore come and let us fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die. So they're in between what my mama called a rock and a hard place. If no matter what we do, we're probably going to die. They're there. And they rose up in the twilight to go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said one to another, Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of the Hittites, the kings of the Egyptians, to come upon us. Wherefore they rose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life. And when these lepers came to the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent and did eat and drink, and carried thence silver and gold and raiment, and went and hid it, and came again and entered into another tent, and carried thence also, and went and hid it. Then they said to one another, We do not well. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come, that we may go and tell the king's household. And the people went out and spoiled the tents of the Syrians. So a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. And the king appointed the Lord, on whose hand he had leaned, to have the charge of the gate. And the people trod upon him in the gate, and he died, as the man of God had said, who spake when the king came down to him. So if we look in these verses, beginning in verse 1, it says, Then Elisha said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus said the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. So these people at this time, during that time of war, the enemies would surround these cities. And if you think of how to beat somebody out, because we read that they build up big fortresses, and it's hard to break into these cities, but you don't have to do that. If you're warring against them, surround them and starve them out, and that's exactly what's happened to them. They're surrounded by the Syrian army, and they have, they're to the bottom of their barrel. They have. Yes, they're not getting anything. It's just not coming to them. And I wanted to read to you. We're going to go back to Moses. So this was written many years before this ever happened. Our lesson here refers us back to Deuteronomy 28, verses 52 through 57. But I'm going to read a little bit from the first of Deuteronomy. 28, it says, now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall you be. So he's telling his nation that if you follow me, you obey me, you put all other gods beside and you put me number one, that you're gonna, it continues, blessed shall you be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, the increase of your herds. So he's telling this nation, if you follow me, you will be full of blessings. But he also says in verse 15 of Deuteronomy 28, it says, but it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Curses shall you be in the city, and cursed you shall be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. So he's given them, he's foretelling the future. If you follow me, you've got two roads, same as we've got today. We've got two options to choose from. And I'm going to skip to verse 52 now. And in Deuteronomy 28, like I said, this was written much earlier than what we're studying now today. And in verse 52, it says, they shall besiege you at all your gates until your high and fortified walls in which you trust come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you at all your gates throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you. You shall eat of the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons, your daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you in the siege and desperate straits in which your enemies shall distress you. So he has foretold the horrible things that happen once you've been overtaken by the enemy. And it wasn't and this was something that they were taught and they were very well aware of. But as we can tell from the situation here, apparently they didn't listen to him. We remember as we studied earlier, when they were going into the land and God would tell them to take this land, destroy everything there, they wouldn't quite go. They would go in and take the land, but they would take some good things for themselves. And it seemed like that most of the time they would leave these Ashtoreth poles and these false gods and their sacrifice places. They wouldn't completely destroy it. So it's like a festering sore that's always there. It's always there. At first they might, go in and I'll serve the God and I'll do that. But then there's a section of people that seem to continue to do the service of these false gods. And it has, as we see over and over, caused Israel bad problems. And you look from the outside and you're thinking, what's the matter with these people? But if we look inside our life, sometimes we do the same thing. Sometimes there's just a little something that we don't completely get rid of, and it always comes back to bite us. It just, that's the way it is, and it's easier to point a finger at somebody else than to look in your own life. And I'll read to you a little bit about a book. It says, once more the people of Samaria were in great straits. They were reduced to the greatest extremities. The women were actually beginning to cook and eat their own children. And can you imagine? I mean, that has to be the worst of the worst that you would do. Whichever way they looked, the prospect was dark. To open the gates to the Syrians meant death or captivity, and the longer they remained within the walls, the more certainly death and starvation stared them in the face. So that, like we said originally, that they're at their wits' end. There's no good move. Like, when you get in checkers or something, that you get backed into the corner and there's no way you can move without bad results from it. And also in this book says the king was a partaker in the wickedness of the people. He encouraged the prevailing idolatry. Now he shares their suffering, but he never thinks of looking to God for deliverance. He never thinks of humbling himself before God. It says, and it says he threatens to take away the prophet's life. Elijah interrupts the king's evil design by a prediction of plenty in Samaria. So when bad things happen, instead of going to this man of God, they want to kill him. And most of the times that we've studied about both Elijah and Elisha, they've been running from these kings and the king's wives for their life. And they're, they haven't done anything of their own. They've only done what the Lord has told them to do. But these kings have been set against these men to kill them, and they haven't gone to them to ask, what should we do at this times? And it's really, the king is in there, and the king is getting hungry, and the king is being besieged too. At times, when we look back, the kings like Ahab and Jezebel, they enjoy riches and great things, while the rest of the kingdom suffer. But this is a situation that even the great king cannot get outside of. And if we remember too, when the Israelites had originally asked that a king be over them, the Lord told them, if this is what you want, this is what you'll have. But these kings, they'll take from your sons to go into the army, they'll take your property, you'll have to do the things they said. So he, even from the beginning, warned them that this was not a good path that they were choosing. But they chose, and he doesn't make puppets out of us and make us choose the good way or the bad way. But he gives us a real good map of what's ahead of us if according to what we choose. In verse 2, it says, then a Lord on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And Elisha said, behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shall not eat thereof. So there's one of the lords in the kingdom that was a top man to the king. And when Elijah says that, tomorrow at this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold. So he's saying tomorrow we're going to have food, and we're going to have flour, and we're going to have barley. Tomorrow we're going to eat. And and this siege has been going on for years now, and now this man of God is saying tomorrow we're going to eat. So the king's right hand man, he kind of another thing my mom said that she accused us of doing is he scoffed at the Elijah, what he said. He's like, you're crazy. Are we going to eat? If God opened the heavens up and had windows built up there, and we wouldn't have anything to eat. So he's mad. He doesn't believe Elijah, what he's saying, and he's even gone so far as kind of to make fun and poke back at him. But Elijah comes back and tells him, behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes. So he's saying, it's going to happen, but you're not going to have any of the spoils of what's going to happen. I looked up on Facebook and I couldn't find it. Maybe you all seen it, because not a lot of good comes from Facebook, but this was one good thing. Somebody was talking about whether you have a belief in the Lord or not, and some people just don't, there's no God in heaven, nobody did this, I just don't believe. And the writer on that little blurb on Facebook had put something about, well, I would rather be wrong in putting my faith in the Lord than take the chance on not believing in him. And, that's what this man is just totally, nothing can be done. I don't care what you say, the Lord can be done. It's not going to be done. And that's the road that this man has taken when he did that. In verse 3, it goes on, it says, and there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said to one another, why sit we here until we die? And remember, we've talked about lepers in the past, that they're really kind of excommunicated from the community. They're not allowed to live among people because leprosy is is contagious, and, you know, they didn't want the whole Israeli population to have it. So generally, their lot in life is that the extras out of the city that they kind of get, you know, throw over the gate and feed these lepers that are out there. They're kind of second-class citizens and whatever. So imagine what kind of shape they're in. The city is besieged. They're starving to death. So the people that they normally help out a little bit, they're really starving to death because they just depended on the morsels that they were given from the plenty inside, but now there's nothing inside and nothing outside to them. In verse 4 it says, if we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. Now therefore come and let us fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die. So they're at the end, you know, that they've decided they've got to do something. That if they go inside that city, those people are starving, so what are they going to get? So they decided to go to the enemy, and they don't know the enemy's going to either feed us or kill us. And they're at the point that, you know, we're going to die, so we're going to go to the enemy and take that chance. In verse 5 it says, and they rose up in the twilight to go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they had come to the uttermost part of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no man there. So, you know, it was kind of dark, twilighty, just in the middle. You can still see, but you can't see real good. They crept to this enemy camp, and you know, the Syrians had, like we say, for I think it's 3 years, had surrounded and kept them at bay. And they come up there to this camp, and there's not even anybody there. Can you imagine? I mean, Neil, when you were in the service, if y'all had been at battle and these people had really been pounding you down, and then you sneak out, you send a scout out to see, and there's not even a person there. So they hadn't been really like, what in the world? It says in verse 6, for the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and the noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said to one another, lo, the king of Israel hath hired us against us, the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians, to come upon us. So, you know, if a lot of times we'll look in the Bible and we'll think that the Lord has only dealings with his chosen people or with Christian people, but the Lord has to deal with every aspect of the world to get to the events to happen as they can. That it's not just, you know, these things to the elections that we do, and we wonder. God's not disinvolved in any aspect of life. He is totally in charge of what's going on at all points, as he was here. And it says that he had caused, so this Syrian army was surrounding Israel, thought they had them, you know, they couldn't do anything else. They're about gone. We're going to get them. And then all of a sudden they hear what sounds like chariots and a great host of armies. So it scares them. So then it says they start thinking that the Israelis have hired other armies to come and attack them from behind. So they ran. It says in verse 7, wherefore they arose and fled in the twilight and left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and they fled for their life. So they didn't pack up their camp and leave. They just booked out of there. They left whatever was there, sat on the ground. It was just such a surprise and a confusing time that they did it. And it says, the book writer says, take courage. He neither sleeps nor slumbers, and he knows what to do about what looks to us as being impossible. He is always right there when the right time arises. So sometimes, you know, and I'm sure some of the people in the city have been praying for something to happen. And God knew what was happening to him. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew exactly what he was going to do when he was going to do it. And go back to verse 8 in the Bible, it says, and when these lepers came to the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent and did eat and drink. and carried thence silver and gold and raiment, and went and hid it, and came again and entered into another tent, and carried thence also, and went and hid it. And this was one of those times, I tell y'all, that I like reading better than seeing a TV show or whatever. You know, can you imagine the lepers, they crept up to that big camp and nobody's there, and they kind of stood, and then it says they went into one tent and nobody was there, and they had all kinds of gold and silver and clothing, and there was food and everything there, and they took it out, and they took it outside, took it away from there, because it's like, this can't be true, and hid it. And then it says, and then they went back into another tent, and they did the same thing. So they're just kind of, I guess, like if you found a buried treasure or something that you thought, oh, wow, you know, who is the owner of this? And is this really true? Am I dreaming? And it was food, you know, these are starving men that are going out there. So they just must be not knowing if they were delirious or if this was real or what was going on with them. And went out and hit it. The blessed writer says, having refreshed and enriched themselves, they bethought them of going to tell the besieged and starving citizens. Every soul that has found Christ should imitate the lepers in this matter. Make sure that you have found the Savior. Eat and drink of him, enrich yourself with him, and then go and publish the great tidings. So we usually talk about how does this lesson have to do with me with 2021, and that is the lesson, you know, that they have found the great riches that God has left them here, and you know, that they've gone in and they've taken and they've filled and they've got themselves 2 big loads of gold and silver, and they've put aside for themselves. And I'm going to read to you verse 9. It says, then they said to one another, we do not well. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come that we may go and tell the king's household. So the same with the Lord of God, that they start thinking it's like, you know what, we don't know what's going on here and what's happened. They've got these spoils, but they're thinking, if we don't tell somebody right now, this is so good, and if we just sit on it, and you know, they could have stayed out there and kept, you know, had mounds all over the place where they hid their stuff. But they decided that this was such a good thing, and they understood that there was a starving city waiting for that, and that they had the goods to change that now that they had talked, you know, they had found it. And the lesson writer says the lepers themselves began to feel that they were not acting rightly in delaying to carry the news of the astonishing plenty to their famine-stricken brethren. The application is obvious to our own duty as to those who possess the saving knowledge of the true God and of Jesus Christ, his Son. We do not well if we behold it from those perishing for the lack of knowledge. So it's saying that's the same as when people find the Lord, if they hide it under a bush, if they don't tell anybody, it's the same. That there are people that are going to perish and die that are waiting to hear that word from somebody. And if we just keep the word and we're not willing to mention Christ or tell people about Christ and try to lead them, that, you know, that this city would have died if waiting in there thinking this army had besieged them. They could have stood in there and died when there was plenty right outside from them. And in verse 16 it says, and the people went out and spoiled the tents of the Syrians. So a measure of flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. So that the lepers obviously went and told the people, and they came out in big masses and got the food, the silver, whatever was out there. So that day they were able to confiscate what food they had, and it was sold just as Elijah had told them that it would be done. Within that next day, this miraculous event had happened. And we notice in verse 17, it says, and the king appointed the Lord on whose hand he laid to have charge of the gate. And the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died, as the man of God had said, who spake when the king came down to him. So remember, the Lord that made fun of him and said, you know, the Lord would have to build windows and make it see out, there's not gonna be any food. Well, there was food. And it says that the king had made him in charge of the gate where people were going in and out to get these plunders, but that they ran over him, that there was such a mob, because they were starving people, if we think about it, that they ran over this man and killed him. So Elijah's prophecy, you know, when he told him that, yes, this will happen, but you'll not see it happen. So, you know, that speaks to people that, I don't believe in the God, you know, I'm not gonna, that just are not willing to open their eyes and look. And that's exactly what happened to this man. At his death, he saw it, but he wasn't able to do anything about it to change. And you know, that's where we are as we live our life. If we refuse to listen to the word of God and to have faith that Jesus Christ came to this earth, that he bled and died for our sins, and all we have to do is accept it. We don't have to, it's not a big to do, and I think that stymies a lot of people because they want to buy it or do great works to do it, but you know, he doesn't ask us for anything. I heard somebody on TV talking the other day about how simple salvation is now versus during the tribulation, when to gain that same access, it'll cost you your life. And he was saying, why wouldn't you choose that now? And if you won't choose it now as a simple thing, are you going to be willing to give your life to choose it later? So that's our application in 2021 for this lesson, because you know, it's good to always see what God is trying to get us to understand from even these Old Testament lessons that we have. So we're a little bit earlier. Do y'all want to answer a couple questions? We don't have Eddie here this morning. I hope Eddie will be here with his wife. It says, what was the condition of Samaria? Yeah, the condition was terrible and starving. And we've not known that. You know, I fuss at Tom and sees, but I'm starved. You know, and we say that when we don't even have a clue what starved is. Yeah, me too. Yeah, that might be a little condition to give. Why did God allow this famine? We read about it in Deuteronomy. That they didn't. He said, if you follow my commandments, blessed you will be in the field, blessed you'll be at home, blessed will be your property. But if you refuse them, cursed you'll be, cursed. And they continually refuse to do this. They just, and it says what warning was given in Deuteronomy, and that was it. Yeah, I didn't realize that was the next. That, you know, he laid it out. It was no secret. He doesn't trap us or trick us. You know, it's not like that. We know we've got the roadmap laid out ahead of us, and it's no trick for him. We just got to make a decision. Sometimes we're headstrong, we're prideful. We just want to do what we want to do. Yes. Yeah, do what we want to do, and then if we want to obey the Lord, then we'll get back on the track. It says, how did the Lord react to Elijah's property? And it doesn't mean God. How did the king's right-hand man? Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, you're nuts. We're starving, and tomorrow we're going to eat right.
Would you see what happened to him?
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't a good idea, was it? How did God save these people from the famine? What had he done that they didn't even know?
Pretty much he sent the lepers out.
He sent the lepers, and he had sent noises to these. You wonder, were there noises, or did he just cause the people in their head to hear these noises? But he caused such an uproar that it scared that army. Yeah.
Yeah. They thought that the Israelites that they hired I remember always defeated.
had mercenaries were coming in and, you know, cause they were probably pretty comfortable out there eating and thinking, you know, these people are starved, they can't bother us. And then all of a sudden, there's a great big army there. It says, why did the lepers feel that it was wrong to withhold the good tidings? Maybe just I guess, a sense of goodwill or whatever. And, you know, the people of the city had taken care of them before and thrown their scraps. So they, you know, I guess they felt a little bit maybe obliged that they
I think, you know, they were trying to help the people that helped them.
yeah, yes.
And that's what we had also done.
Yeah, remember when people help you, you know, sometimes you don't, I always, well, I think back in grade school, there was this girl that every day she didn't have paper, and she would, can I borrow some paper? So I gave her some paper. And I guess she finally used all mine up, and she finally got her own. And I remember asking her one day, can I borrow a sheet of your paper? And she wouldn't give me any. And that was kind of the end of that gravy train, because it's like, I can't believe I've given you paper for months and I can't have, you know, us one for that day. But that's kind of the way.
Kind of selfish.
Yeah, but these lepers weren't, you know, at first they ran in and got, but then they checked themselves. Is there, you know, there's more. It says, how can this be applied spiritually? So what are we to do with what we've got spiritually?
Share the gospel.
Go out, share the gospel. But don't hide it under a bush, as the kids say. And it's, you know, it's given to us to spread. And what was the fate of the unbelieving Lord? I think, Walter, you said, the man that didn't believe it and made fun. What happened to him? He was at a Who concert, wasn't he? He just, the people ran over and he knew what was going on and what was out there for him, but he didn't get a taste of it. And, you know, it's the same. Yes, same with heaven. You know, you can, if you haven't made the decision and don't even on your deathbed, you know, it doesn't change it and make it that heaven's not there. It's just you aren't going to be able to be a part of it and to.
But you know, I think you can find a lot of that from them because they.
Yes. Yeah. Everything pretty much there. It's just, you know, nobody's surrounding our city yet. But, you know, the enemy does surround us all the time. And he tries to convince us not to spread the gospel, that, you know, nobody's going to listen and nobody wants that. Or
He wants you to keep your church walls.
yes, yes. And that's what we come into the church walls is to learn and to learn how to use our weapons and to take them out and use them. And, you know, like a boot camp or training camp, because they equip you for it. And you've eventually got to go do it on your own. And that's what, you know, part of what church is for, besides the fellowship of Christians and being with people that are like nothing. So, has anybody got anything to add this morning?
They was talking about spreading the gospel. My thing, when I'm out, I try to share my testimony coming from alcohol and drugs. The Lord delivered me in October 1982.
And nobody can say that, tell that like you, because you've been there and done that. You know,
I think that's what I was doing. Just about an alcohol counselor.
To spread what's happened. You know, sometimes I was at Planet Fitness one time and I was walking on stuff and there was this little young couple and I noticed that they would keep looking back at me and stuff. And I, you know, at first I thought, okay, I'm an old woman and they're thinking I'm gonna fall off the treadmill or something. But then I realized I had my church shirt that we had made here with a verse from Psalms on it. And then I started thinking, they're probably seeing my shirt and, you know, wondering, you know, what is she wearing? So I thought, you know, because a lot of times when you do wear a t-shirt or something, people will make a comment on what logo on the shirt says. So I thought, you know what, I need a couple more of those shirts, because that's the only one I had, and it, when it was dirty, I couldn't wear it. I had just, and I thought, okay, now where do you find these shirts if you're not making them up or whatever? And me and Hobby happened to be going to Liberty the next day. And we stopped at a dollar store because he was thirsty or something, but just so happened that this little gal from Isaiah House was sitting out front and was selling shirts with scripture on it. And I thought, even if you don't get to talk to people, that they see this, but a lot of people will stop you and ask you about it. So I thought, well, that's just a good way that you can testify, even if you don't have the opportunity to get that close to them, that you are going to have a lot of opportunities, but maybe just spark something in somebody's mind. And that's why I told Tom, like Harley Davidson shirts, it's like, I'm not Harley Davidson, and I don't want to advertise him. Not that, I have a shirt or two, but I'd rather have a shirt that has something about the Lord on it, because that's who I want to relate to. Want to be related. Well, thank you all.